The city of Venice is unlike any other, suspended between reality and fantasy, its beauty and fragility a testament to the audacity of human will. Built on more than 100 small islands in a lagoon, Venice seems almost an impossible dream, an engineering marvel that defies both nature and time. As you wander through its narrow, winding streets, or glide silently along its canals in a gondola, it's hard not to be amazed by how such a city could have been conceived and constructed in the first place. Yet it wasn't by mere chance that Venice rose from the waters. It was the result of centuries of ingenuity, persistence, and often, desperation. It is a city that embodies the clash between human ambition and the forces of nature, a delicate balance that has been in the making for over 1,000 years. It all began in the 5th and 6th centuries, when the people of the Veneto region fled into the lagoon to escape the barbarian invasions that had swept through mainland Italy. The islands, mostly marshy and inhospitable, were not the ideal place to settle. Yet, over time, these early Venetians began to craft a new world out of the water. They developed rudimentary techniques for building on the unstable ground. Instead of relying on traditional foundations, which would have been swallowed by the soft, shifting soil, they began to drive massive wooden stakes deep into the ground. These stakes were made of alder and oak, which, when submerged in water, became almost impervious to decay. The piles were driven into the muddy lagoon bed until they reached a firmer layer of sand and clay. Upon these foundations, they constructed their homes, churches, and buildings. It was a start, but still, Venice was not yet a city. The task of stabilizing the land was one that would take centuries to perfect. Over time, the Venetians learned how to layer thick, dense mats of brushwood and other materials beneath their foundations to give them greater stability. Slowly, the islands began to take shape. What was initially a few scattered buildings grew into a small village. But even as the city began to take form, the waters remained a constant threat. Venice is built on an ever-changing landscape, one that shifts with the tides and the seasons. The city had to adapt to its environment, and in doing so, the Venetians developed some of the most sophisticated and unique engineering techniques the world has ever known. One of the most remarkable feats of Venetian engineering is the system of canals that wind through the city. Unlike most cities, which rely on streets and roads, Venice has a network of waterways that serve as the lifeblood of the city. The canals are not simply picturesque backdrops for tourists, they are functional arteries that connect neighborhoods, markets, and businesses. In the beginning, the Venetians carved out the canals themselves, digging through the muddy lagoon bed with rudimentary tools. The canals allowed the Venetians to move easily between the islands, but they also played a critical role in the city's defense. By controlling the waterways, Venice could keep invaders at bay and protect its citizens from attack. The canals were, in a sense, both a blessing and a curse. They made Venice an incredibly powerful and wealthy city-state, but they also exposed the city to constant threats from the water. To keep the city from sinking into the lagoon, the Venetians developed a system of dredging and water management. The canals were regularly dredged to remove silt and maintain their depth, ensuring that the waterways remained navigable. At the same time, the Venetians built elaborate drainage systems to divert rainwater and prevent flooding. But these efforts were not always enough. The tides could rise unexpectedly, swamping the streets and buildings. The city's foundations, built on wooden piles, were vulnerable to shifting water levels. As the centuries passed, the Venetians faced ever more frequent and severe flooding, particularly during the Acque Alta, the seasonal high tides that inundate the city. Despite these challenges, the Venetians never stopped innovating. They adapted, they learned, and they engineered solutions to keep their city afloat. The 12th and 13th centuries saw some of the most ambitious construction projects in Venice's history. It was during this time that many of the city's most iconic structures were built. The Doge's Palace, the Rialto Bridge, and St. Mark's Basilica were all constructed using sophisticated engineering techniques. The Doge's Palace, for example, is a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, its grand façade overlooking the Piazza San Marco. To ensure the stability of the palace, the Venetians used a technique called pale sèche, dry piles in which the wooden stakes were driven deep into the lagoon bed. but in this case, the stakes were left to dry before they were driven in. This allowed the wood to harden and become more durable, preventing it from rotting in the water. The Rialto Bridge, the oldest and most famous of the bridges crossing the Grand Canal, was another triumph of Venetian engineering. Originally constructed in the 12th century, it was rebuilt in stone in the late 16th century. The bridge was designed to withstand the weight of pedestrian traffic and the constant movement of boats beneath it. Its iconic arch, which rises high above the canal, is a testament to the ingenuity and skill of Venetian builders. But even as Venice flourished, the city faced new challenges. By the 16th century, the city's dominance as a trading power began to wane, and with it, the money and resources needed to maintain its infrastructure. The city's canals, once the lifeblood of Venice, became clogged with silt, making navigation increasingly difficult. The lagoon, too, began to show signs of distress. Rising water levels, erosion, and pollution all began to take their toll. By the 20th century, Venice had become a city under siege not just from the forces of nature, but from the weight of its own history. The very engineering marvels that had made the city so unique were now contributing to its downfall. In the 1960s and 1972, engineers began to realize that the city's foundations were not as stable as once believed. The wooden piles that supported the buildings were slowly rotting, and the ground beneath the city was sinking. In addition, the extraction of groundwater from underground aquifers had caused the ground to sink even further. The situation was dire. Venice was sinking at a rate of about 1 to 2 millimeters per year. If nothing was done, the city might one day disappear beneath the waves. The response to this crisis was nothing short of ambitious. A number of solutions were proposed, from building giant seawalls to installing elaborate flood barriers. But perhaps the most famous and controversial of these projects is the MOSE project, Modulo Sperimental Elettromeccanico, a system of massive barriers designed to protect Venice from flooding. The project, which began in the early 2000s, involves the construction of 78 mobile barriers that will be deployed during high tide to keep the waters at bay. The barriers are designed to rise from the seabed and block the flow of water into the lagoon, preventing floods from reaching the city. When completed, the MOSE project promises to protect Venice from flooding for decades to come. However, it has been plagued by delays, corruption scandals, and cost overruns, and its long-term effectiveness remains uncertain. Despite the challenges, the people of Venice have never given up. The city's survival is a testament to the resilience of its people and their ability to adapt to the changing environment. The Venetians have always been a people of innovation and resourcefulness, and they continue to work toward finding new ways to preserve their city for future generations. Venice may face challenges, but as long as there is a will to protect it, the city will continue to stand, an impossible city, built on the water, held up by the ingenuity of its people. And perhaps, in that impossible balance between human ambition and the relentless pull of the sea, Venice will remain, forever, suspended in time. Even as Venice faces these daunting challenges, the city still stands as a testament to the power of human ingenuity. Its impossible engineering feats, from the wooden piles that form its foundations to the canals that make up its transportation system, have allowed the city to endure for over 1,000 years. But the task of keeping Venice afloat is far from over. Every year, as the tide rises and falls, the engineers and architects of Venice continue their work, trying to find new solutions to old problems. It is a never-ending battle, one that may never have a final resolution. Yet, for all the trials and tribulations that Venice has faced, it remains a living, breathing monument to the impossible, to the idea that when people work together with ingenuity and determination, they can accomplish the unthinkable. In the end, it is this spirit, the spirit of the Venetians, the spirit of a city built on water, rising against the odds, that makes Venice a living miracle of engineering. Despite the floods, despite the sinking foundations, despite the passage of time and the erosion of its buildings, Venice remains a symbol of what humanity can achieve. For as long as the city endures, the story of its impossible engineering will continue to captivate and inspire. And perhaps, in some future age, the world will look upon Venice not just as a city of the past, but as a city that refused to be defeated by the challenges of its own creation. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story of Venice's impossible engineering, don't forget to subscribe for more captivating tales of history, innovation, and human resilience. Stay tuned for future stories that dive deep into the wonders of the world.